It's almost kind of funny that I read the Type Moon visual novels in the order I did, which on the Holy Night was the first ever, or first known Type Moon work to ever be written, even if the original novel is what was written and not the visual novel. And while I played Tsukuhime's remake, the original story was the introduction of Type Moon into the visual novel space. So the fact that I did that before Fate Stay Night, that's fascinating as well. But here we are now with Fate Stay Night. Admittedly, this is not my first attempt to review this visual novel. About 2 years back, I tried to review Fate Stay Night. The video would have come up in, similar to this one, it would have come up originally in parts, merged into one at the end. It would have been, but, it didn't go well. Basically, I was using a pretty janky port of Fate Stay Night to the iPhone. If you know how to do it, you know how to do it, but it's kind of an emulation thing. And it's not official. So, about 80% of the way through the Fate route, maybe 90% of the way through the Fate route, the Fate route app I had fucked over and just would not load. I mean, I had to finish the rest of it up in the also kind of janky online web version. And Unlimited Blade Works also died, this time about 80% of the way through. And at that point, I just said, fuck it. And that was for the longest time the accessibility issues that the Fate Stay Night visual novel had. Honestly, it almost became a full video rant about the accessibility of the Type Moon works in the West. That all changed when the Mihoyo visual novel got announced for localization. That's why that rant never made it to video form. And then, rather conveniently, both Fate Stay Night and Tsukuhime got announced for localization as well. And now Hollow Oxia is out too. God, that's how long this review took for me to get out. Hollow Oxia came out and I've already started it. Fuck! But at the end of the day, by August 2024, I had a working localized copy of Fate Stay Night in my hands. I'll just grab... That's right. They never made a physical release for this one, and I'm still pissed off about it. Not even in Japan. I can't even collect the Japanese version and have that for a shelf piece or to pull out for this review. But regardless, the visual novel is now accessible with its new translation. It should be noted just how big this is. I have nothing but the utmost respect for fan translators. But as a reviewer online, it's a little bit hard with fan translations. Translation quality can greatly affect how you feel about the work. And this isn't to say that the fan translations are all bad, or that the Fate Stay Night fan translation was bad, or that all the translations put out by the official localizations are good. But one writing, especially at the level that Nasu likes to write, and some of the other Type Moon writers like to write, there is a bit of a poetic intent that fan translations don't always know how to make work, and when they do try to make it work, sometimes it's not quite the same as original authorial intent. When there's problems with the translation, it's a lot harder to call out in the review. For one, because this was a wholly, usually unpaid labor of love by the fans. So who am I not doing translations to be criticizing them on this? And for another, I can't even hold it against the work very much, because this is not a translation that was put out with any kind of greenlighting from the author. If it's a bad translation, at least the author was the one that greenlit it, or the author or whatever company the author put the IP in the hands of greenlit it. So I can criticize the work for that it was greenlit. If it's a... How do I put this? If it's a horrifyingly bad translation, or if they make and it was overseen by the author, I can criticize it, because the author is the one that thought that was a good idea. So like, we can sit here and criticize Artoria becoming Altria. That's a stupid translation, Nasu. That's your fault. Viewers of the channel may remember the Fate Prototype Fragments review as an example of this, where there were a couple translation choices that had both Seki and I scratching our heads. But Seki and I had no idea what or who to critique, if anyone, for that, because it wasn't necessarily wholly the original novel's fault, and it definitely was this is how they tried to get this stuff across in the translation. It just didn't work. So that's kind of the issue with relying on fan translations. So I am happy that for at least the big 3 visual novels, the remake, Fate Stay Night, and Mihoyo, I've been able to experience them with official localizations, because any issues I have with that, like typos being present in the original script of Mihoyo, that's on somebody who down the chain of events, or down the chain of web, was greenlit by Nasu. The fact that Type Moon has been a lot more open about localizing works lately, honestly, I can only be thankful for that. They have been incredibly open about localizing works. Between this, Mihoyo, Tsukihime, even more lately, they've been getting into the more novelized, like not novelized works, but the more like paperback stuff, like Prisma Ilya just got its volume, like the first part of it, localized. So what can I complain about anymore with that? It's good. It's unequivocally good that we're getting official translations and localizations now. So, without further ado, Wait. Sorry, forgot to download the day 1 patch. There we go. Fate Stay Night is now the oldest visual novel from Type Moon on the market. While technically the classic Tsukihime is older, it was never properly published onto, especially not modern gaming devices, but it was only ever published as a doujin, released in versions at Comiket and various other related events. Not to knock the quality at all, but it's notable that Fate has always had a wider release with more budget to go on. But as a result, there was a lot less of a need for Type Moon to remake this visual novel. And as a result, it consequently stands as the least visually impressive visual novel on a completely different engine from the modern visual novels. Because of that, anyone that's coming over from those other 2 visual novels that Type Moon has released may find themselves slightly disappointed at the lower production value. I won't sit here and try to say that it's not a mountain newer fans are going to have to climb. Honestly, I would just be lying at that point. But I will say, for what it's worth, this one is absolutely a mountain worth scaling. Bumps and all. This visual novel is a bit of a slow burn with a great soundtrack. More so than even the other 2 that I've read to this point. The early parts of both the Fate route and the Unlimited Blade Works route can be a bit of a chore to read through, especially for those who are already familiar with the Fate property and those who are fans of the anime that are doubling back to read the visual novel. Like me. Nasu has this habit in writing, and I don't blame him for it. But it's there, and Seki notices as well. When I was in high school, my Japanese teacher told me something that really stuck with me. I've held it close and dear as a quote that I constantly find myself coming back to. You're probably wondering why the white guy is teaching Japanese, but a close second most important quote from him that maybe feels a little bit more relevant to the point I'm trying to make here is To make someone understand something, you've got to explain it about 3 times for it to stick. Some people will get it at the first, but if you don't explain it 3 times, others will immediately forget it. Well, I feel like for lore elements that Nasu wants you to remember, he takes that exact same approach. Explain the important stuff. Explain the important stuff again. Explain the important stuff again. Damn the people that are already getting impatient over the over-exposition. We have media illiterate people we need to focus on here. It leads to some of his writing feeling a bit circular, which works for making your fan base a walking Wikipedia page, but it makes repeat readings of a couple of these works that are a little bit more high concept, especially like Fate, a bit rough to sit through. But once the 2 original roots actually get going, the character writing is probably their strongest suit. Characters often appear to have the width of a puddle, but turn out to have the depth of an ocean. Between the initial 2 roots, I will say the first root, Fate, is just a little bit stronger. It felt a lot less uneven, and while a much simpler story, was just paced better overall. Unlimited Blade Works just suffers problems of pacing and emphasis, even through its later portions, that bring it down a little bit. And unfortunately, of the roots, Unlimited Blade Works is the only one I can pretty confidently say the anime might actually be stronger than the visual novel. All that said, however good those 2 roots were, Heaven's Feel feels like its own product altogether. I was almost in disbelief at how well written this route was after spending the previous 40 hours on the previous 2 routes in the visual novel. Every scene felt thematically rich, and its characters, who I'd already learned to love over my time as a Fate fan, had managed to recapture my heart once again. I've kind of mentioned it before, but there's a bit of an elephant question in the room whenever you're talking something like Fate Stay Night with its many anime adaptations. Can you watch the anime to get the same experience? No. And this isn't a dig at the anime. I have nothing but respect for the products in their own right. And if you have to watch an anime because you either can't afford a copy of the VN or don't have the patience for visual novels, there's no shame in it. I'm not some gatekeeper that will tell you how to experience these works. But I'll say that both Fate and Heaven's Feels animes are far inferior products to their visual novel versions. The Fate anime by Studio Dean just makes way too many writing decisions that end up being very weird, and I'll probably touch on those a little bit later, maybe even a little extra later. But those decisions change how viewers will view the events of the story. In Heaven's Feel had an admittedly impossible task of translating feelings that only work because of the way they are paced in the visual novel that wouldn't translate to screen ever. So instead it hyper-focuses on 1 or 2 elements and tells a story that, in a way, it's still good, but never reaches the same heights as the visual novel. Unlimited Blade Works is the sole route where the anime adaptation captures the original visual novel well, and even exceeds the original in some aspects. But being the middle route, it's kind of a problem of, if you're reading the visual novel at this point, you're in for an inch, you're in for a dime. If you can bring yourself to read the visual novels, it's best to just read the visual novel first. So that really rounds us out with what I can talk about without going over the events of each route. So from this point on, heavy spoiler warning. I will be spoiling the entire visual novel. So go read the visual novel, or at least watch the anime and come back. I promise this one is going to be long and worth it. This prologue it's a bit of a fucking trick, actually. I mean, it's pretty obvious these days that Shirou is the protagonist of Fate Stay Night, but if you were to go off just the prologue, like when you first start the game, and you didn't know about the anime, you didn't know about what comes later, you would be forgiven for believing Rin was going to be our character that we followed the perspective of from beginning to end. It's written in first person from her perspective. She gives you all the information you need. The prologue sets the stage as it being her story, when at least as far as the literal telling of the story goes, it's not. Primarily what that means is we're getting some pretty good exposition here on what it means to be a mage or to participate in the Holy Grail War, including how servants work, in a way that we're just not going to get with Shirou's naive ass. It also helps take the piss out of Rin when she eventually appears later. Generational mage, maybe? But she's also kind of just a girl failure, to be honest. She's horrible at waking up before the crack of noon, missed the best time to do an extremely important ritual of just summoning her heroic spirit, doesn't get the servant class that she was trying to get, can't identify who her heroic spirit actually is, her servant just fucking ruins her house, and the guy she has a low-key crush on, she seems completely incapable of hearing his voice. Wait, what? That's a setting of visual novel, and not Rin being a fuck up. Why the hell did they do that? Anyways, keeping in theme, the first servant fight she gets into almost results in her death, because she gets ambushed by Lancer. Not Assassin, fucking Lancer ambushes her. Predictably, the only way out is for her low-key crush, whom I'm told she can actually hear the voice of, just stumbling in, and by law of magecraft, he needs to be killed. This certified girl failure arrives just in time to, oh no, she's too late. The motherfucker is already dead as a doornail. The proper mage thing to do is hide the body, and instead she thinks with her dick and blows her life savings on reviving a guy who will only get with her in one out of the 5 possible endings of this visual novel. The stupid girl then flees the scenes and realizes way too late why it's common courtesy for men to walk their girlfriends and people they want to be close with home at night and wait for the door to be shut before they leave. Reason 1, because it's endearing and gives you brownie points for your thoughtfulness. Reason 2 is because when you are physically more capable, there's less a chance of some dog-smelling Celt jumping your loved one and impaling them with a cursed spear the second time in one night. Rin and her archer charge out to save the guy she just blew her entire life savings on, only to find out that yes, he did get jumped. And oh shit, he's found another girl who can protect him. Good job, Rin. You fumbled the bag and only have a 2 out of 5 chance success of recovering. Oh yeah, and the guy you like? Yeah, his new girl may have just killed your servant. Root analysis. Wait, I'm doing an analysis on the fucking prologue? Of course. Why wouldn't I? I strongly believe the prologue exists to set up a theme of the frailty of expectations. Rin as a character is molded by the expectation placed on her by growing up as the heir to a mage family. She will insist upon trying to live up to that expectation, but will, across all 3 routes, largely fail at this, most of the time having to drop out of the Grail War halfway through to protect others. Something definitively not mage-like. Rin is expected by T.H.E to become a master, something she puts off to the very last minute, haphazardly, almost missing the chance altogether because of bad alarm clocks. And the expectations of the reader are seemingly shattered by the end as our perspective character, who we expect to be our main protagonist, ends up humiliated and appears to be unceremoniously defeated at the end of the prologue. I promise, guys, I really like Rin a lot, but her failure streak in this prologue is just kind of hilarious to me. I don't think that Fate Stay Night is a work strongly built around subverting expectations in the same way that Game of Thrones tries to be, or a Rian Johnson film tries to be. But expectations placed on someone by both themselves and others becomes an important building block in working towards the overarching themes of Fate Stay Night. Now, let's get right into the classic Fate route. Passnicknack, what the fuck are you doing? What? We're doing the Great Ace Attorney on Off the Shelf. I've got to get this done. That way, we could be doing this any day now. That video is scheduled for April next year. It's only August. She hasn't even started reading it yet. Look, sorry. When I finish this up, I'll get back to reading Fate Stay Night. Promise. The beginning of the Fate route follows mostly the same 3 days that Rin's prologue did. Biggest difference here is, despite what you may think of the characters, Shirou is notably not a fuck-up, unlike Rin. At least not yet. He holds down a part-time job, has a nice house, can cook, clean, is good with machines, is on good terms with the local Yakuza family, is friends with the student council president, he's pretty athletic, and he's in a very healthy situationship with his toxic ex-best friend's younger sister. Hang on, I might be giving him too much credit here. We all know, more or less, how the story goes from Rin's route. Shirou is out late being the kind of guy who can't say no to people, when he sees Archer and Lancer fighting to the death. His cluelessness saves Rin's sorry ass and gets himself killed. She revives him and flees, and he goes home to get jumped by a rabid dog. He then accidentally summons a fucking GSSR servant on his first try. Like, are you fucking kidding me right now? It took me months to summon a GSSR when I first started FGO. And this guy drops the equivalent of a summon ticket and pulls franchise mascot Artoria Pendragon on his first try. Fucking bullshit, that's what it is. Artoria fights back Lancer, only taking a flesh wound, and proceeds to jump Archer and Rin. There's a bit of a route split here, where the events can differ, but for the purposes of this route, Shirou fails to process what's going on fast enough to stop Saber from nearly killing Archer and Rin, but she's saved by Shirou's cluelessness once again. In a truly forehead move, Rin decides to take Shirou to her creepy adoptive guardian and teacher, Kirei Kotomine. Rin doesn't even trust him enough to contact him at the start of the war, and she brings him here for some reason. All cause she didn't feel like explaining shit in detail to Shirou. She doesn't like Kirei at all, and let me tell you, across all the routes, despite more or less knowing intuitively that this man is an untrustworthy, obvious villain, she lets her low-key crush continually visit him. And then, for the third time that night, Rin gets jumped by a servant that's not an assassin. This time, it's Ilya and Berserker. And once again, the guy she has a low-key crush on is pretty much killed. She just gets lucky that he survived a mortal wound. I can really only take so many bad choices by Rin, so I'm gonna fast forward a little here. Rin and Shirou form an alliance despite what the anime adaptation may have made you think at this point. Oh yeah, let's mention the anime now. In the anime, Shirou and Rin do not make an alliance at all. Instead, they get into a pissing match. More on that later. Here, though, they ally pretty much from the start. The anime is actually hugely responsible for Shirou's bad rap. Way more than I think a lot of old school fans would give it credit for. Like, that limping from an arm wound thing that Seki likes to harp on. Yeah, that just isn't in the visual novel. At all. That wholly is the anime's fault. But that's not all. Later in the visual novel, it becomes extra obvious. Rin and Shirou realize that someone set up a bounded field that's draining the students of the school of their mana. So they begin to look into it. In the anime, Rin smartly instructs Shirou not to investigate alone, and in the visual novel, she does not. Now, while Rin is smarter about that in the anime, it squarely moves the dunce hat from her to Shirou, leading him to being met with Shinji, who, in the anime, only attacked him a day or two prior. And then, in the anime and in the visual novel, he goes to Shinji with no protection at all. By letting Rin continue to be the fuck-up of the group, and not instructing Shirou, and by not having Rider attack way too early, Shirou stumbles on Shinji while he is looking somewhere on a whim. And Shinji seems significantly more sympathetic than he does in the anime, even casting doubt to Rin's intentions. Cause let's be real, we already know she's a fuck-up. So, from Shirou's perspective, it seems far more reasonable for him to hear out Shinji and not assume he's evil as shit. In fact, there was at one point in development possibly going to be a route where Shirou joined with Shinji. This never happened, but I imagined it probably would have been about at this point in the visual novel. Now, it's time to shift the dunce cap from Rin to the actual main heroine of the route, who's done surprisingly little besides be muscle that Shirou makes the occasional sexist comment towards, as you do. Saber hears from Shirou that Shinji told him, that Rider told him, that something not right is squatting at Ryudo Temple. And with this shaky news, Saber runs right out against Shirou and Rin's reasonable judgment, and Shirou has to be the responsible one to save her as she almost dies to a fucking assassin. Dear God, these women. One gets ambushed by a berserker, and the other one almost loses a one-on-one duel with an assassin. What is wrong with them? Well, what's wrong with Saber is that Shirou is a shitty master, in terms of raw magic energy provided. She can barely use her noble phantasm, and despite feeling like she can bulldoze the entire Grail War with raw power, she in fact cannot like this. And this fuck up on her part leads to her and Shirou coming to a compromise where she and Rin train Shirou. And Shirou will get a better understanding of what fights he can and cannot win. Somewhere in here, though, Shirou decides to make a totally galaxy brain move and decides to start hanging out with Ilya, who visits him in the market, promising not to murder him because they're in broad daylight. Aww, she's adorable. She totally didn't ask Berserker to violate Saber a couple days ago. Jesus Christ, what's wrong with the woman around Shirou? Okay, now is probably a good time to say I was not enjoying the Fate route. A not insignificant part of why this took so long was because it felt remarkably exposition heavy. The character interactions rarely felt like they led to anything that deep. So all I could really focus on was Rin's massive noggin, Saber's lack of characterization beyond wanting to fight, and up until now, only briefly touched upon low-key sexism that Shirou shows. These aren't even flaws that will be considered later. Future routes don't have these character traits front and center. Even this route will largely shift to more compelling character arcs, meaning a lot of time spent on this stuff early in the route feels just wasted. For anyone that may think that I might be just action-brained and bored with my critique of the early parts of this route, I present Day 7. Day 7 is really good, and it's all character interaction. Namely, it's the start of our dynamics with Rin teaching Shirou Magecraft, while Saber beats Shirou within an inch of his life to teach him the basics of human mortality. Okay, maybe she doesn't go that far, but that's the idea. Saber also starts to actually begin interacting with Shirou as a human, which is the start of an admittedly awkward romance between the two of them. Really, by now, all the character dynamics are starting to fall into place for this route. Without getting too detailed here, Rin is a mage. Saber is love interest. Ilya is fake, read real, little sister. Taiga is a bad parental figure. Archer is cryptic to a fault, and Sakura can get the fuck out. God damn it, Rin. These are the roles the characters will occupy for the rest of the story, and a lot of that is solidified in this day. Some of which are the seeds for other routes, such as Ilya's little sister act being a focus of this route but a centerpiece of Heaven's Feel. Actually, on the topic of Ilya, this day is also Easily readable is the point where Ilya stops trying to kill Shirou. The topic of Kiritsugu comes up, and this serves as a point of realization for Ilya that Kiritsugu did not just give Shirou everything he should have given her. This is also the setup for why Ilya starts taking the actions she does for the rest of the route, where she starts seeing Shirou as something Kiritsugu had, and thus she deserved. And I'll be real, from day 7 onwards, the route begins a bit of an upswing. The characters during the mini training arc feel a lot more defined. Shirou goes from having an arc involving him being desperate to stop anyone else but him from fighting, to instead pivoting to a more relatable arc of learning to know one's limits and accepting help. Saber's arc gets a lot more focused as well. As time goes on, it really begins to focus on learning to live for herself and not constantly chasing a higher purpose or ideal. That she needs to fight because she wants to stop being a tool. And Rin. Actually, what am I talking about? That dunce of a woman doesn't seem to have a coherent thought in her head. One moment, she's focused on herself, and then the next, Shirou. Clearly, a true moron if I've ever seen one. Okay, jokes aside, Rin does actually have very little character development from this point onwards. It'll come back, and her character will greatly grow in the other 2 routes. But within the Fate route, she becomes mostly a tool for exposition, and to move the story along, showing brief snippets of her character arcs from the other routes. Ultimately, Shirou and Saber end up fighting Shinji, and the entire sequence ends up being a surprisingly well-designed culmination of the lessons the game has been trying to teach Shirou at this point. It's not difficult, mind you, but feasibly, if you are paying attention, these choices are not just a matter of experimentation, trial, and error. They are huge character moments for Shirou's growth. But the dude may have been around idiot Tosaka for too long. Now he's actually being dumb. He stresses out over Saber bringing herself to the brink of death by using her noble phantasm to kill Ryder, and manages to end up at a park with Ilya in sundown. Ilya kidnaps him and threatens everyone around him if he doesn't swear to be her servant, which involves getting his soul stuffed into a doll while his body becomes a puppet. Jesus fucking Christ, Ilya! Shirou eventually saves himself just as Saber, Rin, and a now-healed Archer arrive to save him. But they are intercepted at the door by Ilya and Berserker Heracles, who is, without exaggeration, a hard motherfucker to kill. So Archer stays back to buy them some time while Shirou, Rin, and Saber flee. And then comes Caliber! No. Don't make me do this. I'm not gonna do it. You can't make me. Fuck, fine, they fuck. Saber is still near death from dropping Excalibur on Ryder earlier. And cause they need to break into the visual novel market, the healing process is sex in a rundown shack while my boy Archer gets beaten to death by the Incredible Hulk. Lore-wise, it's mana transfer, and is like an analog way of moving Shirou's mana to Saber. So welcome to my brief thoughts on the Fate Route's damned H scene. What can I say about them that hasn't already been said, though? This one was written terribly. It has the steaminess of smoke, like the writer thought what they were writing was titillating, but it ends up being just uncomfortable. Like, it never devolves into full-on non-con. But there's a level of that type of thing in it that can make it a little weird and oddly out of character for everyone involved. Wow. What else? I guess the CGs are really good. Like, I can respect the art, just not the writing. I think if there's any quality to take away from these scenes, it's that the morning awkwardness and the awkwardness that will follow to the next day makes a shit ton more sense in the H version of the VN. These two characters literally just had sex, and they weren't mentally prepared to have that with each other. Your ass would be pretty awkward, too. Hey, Knick-Knack and Poster. I realized I forgot to talk about the second H scene. That's much later in the VN, but I also have an awkward spot here I can put it in. It's fine. It's just the softer version of the Bridge Fallout scene where they're expressing how much they really can't agree with each other, but they still try to find comfort in each other's presence while they still have the chance. Cute enough, but it's nothing to write home about, so I'm just going to leave it as is like there. Okay, now that's enough. In the all-ages version of the scene, Rin uses close contact to transplant a piece of Shirou's magic circuit to Saber to open a direct pathway between them and allow her to recover mana. It actually does serve as a good thematic sacrifice for Shirou. In saving Saber, he's giving up his potential to ever be the strong hero he wants himself to be. He's literally giving a part of himself to a woman he loves so that they can be together. I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's a very easy thing to point out here. Shirou and Saber end up fighting Herc, who still wrecks their shit until Shirou miraculously summons Caliburn and wields it together with Saber to cut down Berserker Heracles once and for all. Now for that fucked up murder lolly that threatened to do multiple vile things and killed Rin's live-in maid. Yeah, Shirou just invites her to stay at the Emiya household. And we enter the final stages of this visual novel route. And well, this stage may actually be a little bit unfamiliar to anime-onlys, because anime watchers, once again, are treated to the after effects of making a Frankenstein abomination of an anime adaptation. The rest of the route places heavy emphasis on the budding romance between Saber and Shirou. It becomes increasingly apparent that they both caught feelings for each other, but oh no, Saber doesn't wish to remain in the modern era, as she wants to use her wish to save her homeland. And, to top it all off, our band of idiots are dealing with something truly dangerous. It starts when they come under attack by Castor, who seems desperate for some reason. It is immediately apparent that she lacks a master, and Assassin has died off-screen. She claims to have killed them, but it is fairly evident she is lying and trying to rebuild power to deal with whatever it was. After a very brief scuffle with her at the Emiya residence, she is sneak attacked by the Golden Servant, who Saber recognizes as Gilgamesh, humanity's oldest hero and the archer servant of the previous Grail War. This is not how the anime version went. The anime version did something a bit weird. It chose to combine elements of all three routes for this part. It takes its own spin on the Sakura and Rin stuff from Heaven's Feel, the Rin and Shirou vs. Castor and her master parts of UBW, the final fight between Assassin and Saber from UBW, and the death of Castor from Fate. It is a mess. I will credit the anime version that it solves a couple issues, like not killing Assassin off screen and giving Castor an actual presence in this route, but the entire thing ends up feeling like a bit of an anime ass pull. It also does some damage too, because despite the issue of the off-screen killing of Assassin and the downplaying of Castor, stuff like this did help the visual novel feel less railroaded. Like, the world itself is breathing, even if Shirou is not yet directly involved. Something that especially the Fate route can suffer from sometimes. Anyways, despite having Mr. Gold himself on their doorstep and making not so vague threats to Shirou and Saber because he has the hots for Saber, Shirou decides to take Saber on a date. And now's a good time to talk about what I think of the romance. It's rough. Like, really rough. This entire route in some ways is built around this romance as an overarching story, and it can be a bit weak at times outside of the setup. Our purpose of this particular story is mostly the romance between Shirou and Saber. And I think this being the first route may have been a mistake. Saber and Shirou suffer greatly from meandering writing, where you almost feel Nasu getting a solid grasp on these two characters as he's writing them. The result is that their characterization doesn't start feeling fully formed until the end of the route, and the romance never has the build-up to feel believable. Consequently, it makes Shirou's attempts to dissuade Saber from trying to save her homeland by eliminating herself kind of shitty. What we end up getting is that it's a little hard to frame Shirou's desires, which he is pushing on Saber, in a light that doesn't come off as toxic or sexist. I get it. When I really get into it, I do get it. The point is that Saber's plan wouldn't work, and that in going through with it, she's not doing good by her land or herself. But to understand that you really need to lore dump on the reader. It's a little hard to keep up with. And yet, thematically, it's not terrible at all. When I break down what Shirou and Saber's characters represent, I get it. Again, I get it. It's well done thematic writing. But the character writing feels like it probably could have used another draft or two. Predictably, that same night, things don't go well between the two of them, and the two end up parting ways in frustration. Shirou does rejoin with her, though, because kind of predictably, Gilgamesh attacks her while they're alone. And Shirou manages to barely protect her by projecting Excalibur's scabbard, but the two have no idea how to deal with Gilgamesh after this. After discovering that Kirei has a literal child torture basement, Lancer is revealed to be Kirei's servant. But Lancer will turn on both Kirei and Gilgamesh if Saber chooses to help Shirou. Actually, it's kind of cool that your choices can impact whether or not Saber chooses to save Shirou. Kind of like she's the one playing the visual novel in this situation for once. That said, it's really easy to avoid the bad ending here. Just, don't be a dick. Lancer ends up fighting Gilgamesh off for hours off-screen. But by the time Shirou and Saber return home, Kirei has incapacitated Rin. Damn it, Rin! I knew you sucked at this, but you now have been ambushed by the guy you literally already knew was evil as shit. It didn't bother making a harder push against trusting him. Good going! And because of Rin's lack of communication skills, Ilya gets kidnapped to be used as the Holy Grail because lore. Saber and Shirou make one final plan to give Saber back Avalon, which this entire time has been sitting in Shirou healing his mortal wounds. So with that, the two end up going to confront Kirei and Gilgamesh. This fight scene in particular is kind of just... it is what it is. It doesn't feel as climactic as it probably should, because Kirei is so cartoonishly evil, and Gilgamesh was kind of a Deus Ex villain here, with motivations that'll never be addressed again outside of this route. Honestly, Kirei needed a little more characterization besides just being creepy priest, and Gilgamesh is another case of thematic use being good, but having bad characterization. His whole role is to be a foil to Shirou for this route, and I get that. But story-wise, he comes out of nowhere and trivializes every bit of the conflict the characters have been through so far. In the end, Shirou and Saber are forced to say a tearful farewell. Saber has recognized the fault in her wish and is going to return to her time to rest in peace. But before she goes, she admits her feelings to Shirou. Can I be real here? The Fate route was kind of aggressively mid. Thematically, it found its footing for sure, and we will get into that. There's something beautiful there. But the story itself feels undercooked and over-explained. The Shirou-Saber romance never feels believable and in line with their interactions. Most of its characters get sort of forgotten or written out early, and I feel like the route rarely takes any unpredictable steps. This route at times was just a bit hard to finish. And I kind of feel bad because I know for many, this route is Fate Stay Night. For me, it's just a glorified extended tutorial and a prologue. The Fate route to me feels like it's written in two distinct parts. The first half is primarily about Shirou coming to terms with his limitations, and the second is about Artoria coming to terms with hers. Both have ideals not actually achievable. For Shirou, it's his desire to be a strong hero, and for Artoria, it's her desire to be a perfect king for Britain, which is why she has such a low view of herself that comes through a lot in the second half. Across both ends of the story, we have our characters acknowledge their imperfections, and not necessarily appreciating them, but learning to live with them. But obviously, that's all surface level. Thematically, I think what's more important is analyzing what's being drawn here with the idea of history and our idealization of it. Artoria's bit, to me, feels more important than Emiya's thematically. His here feels mostly around to draw a parallel to hers. And obviously, it's to set up the greater arc he will be experiencing across all three. For Artoria, though, what we are seeing is a look back at her imperfections, that of her nation's history and her lack of ability as a hero to lead her nation down a perfect road. This route is about nothing if not the rejection of perfection. History and people will be imperfect. There will be things to regret and things to learn from. But what's impossible is actually impossible. I just had to write that Emiya ass line in here somewhere. I'm sorry. There isn't an active way to suddenly make wrong right, and often what comes from mistakes, both personal and not, can be something beautiful in itself. But there's also a distinct rejection of resting on that understanding of letting whatever happens happen. By the end of the story, Artoria doesn't stick around. Gilgamesh, the villain, wants the same thing Shirou does, to keep Artoria in the present day. She still rejects that. Granted, Shirou stops heavily pushing it once it becomes clear what the Grail is, but my reading of Gilgamesh's thematic role in the story is that of acting as a representation of the despotism of pride. The confidence that nothing wrong that happened matters. Gilgamesh is lauded as a great hero, and yet he reflects none of that, being solely focused on looking forward at his next prize. He is an opposing force to Saber, whilst being a foil to Shirou, who starts the story already not letting himself live in the past. Now, we will probably have that perspective deconstructed later in another route, but there is the negative reflection of Shirou's inability to preserve the moment and what he's already built for himself. Artoria represents clinging to that past. Shirou is one who is dissatisfied with the present, and Gilgamesh sees only a false future. Now, I may be reading a lot of this wrong here, so I'm going to move on to something else. This story is also primarily a romance. Now, that may seem like a no-duh statement to you, but you'll find I won't say the same about Unlimited Blade Works later. After my Tsukihime review and analysis almost focused wholly on this part, I promise this isn't nearly as focused on that same idea as that review was, or that visual novel was. In fact, I don't know that this story has much to say on the themes of romance, so much as Shirou and Artoria just complete each other. As opposed to the more sweeping themes of Tsukihime's romances. Avalon is a representation of Artoria's, or you can make an argument, society's ideals. The drive to create a utopia that can never actually exist. Our fantasies in some ways. Excalibur is the realistic power that comes from ideals, the movements, or unions it creates, but practical power has nothing on the original ideals. So long as the original ideas are intact, the people in a movement can continue to recover even after painful losses. Fate here hones in on the loss of Avalon, as the point where Artoria lost sight of her ideals in favor of a practical, cold outlook on creating her perfect utopia. This is her growing up. The same phenomena that Kiritsugu explains to Shirou in many of the flashbacks. It became harder for him to be a hero once he grew up. This isn't Fate Zero's analysis, but it's no coincidence that Kiritsugu also had Avalon and gave it up by the end of his story. Shirou is the current one holding on to those ideals that both Saber and his adoptive father lost or gave up, and one day it may well fade from his grasp as well. So when you break down the romance of Shirou and Saber, and the arc they experience in this route, it's rather contingent on that scabbard. It's about Artoria rediscovering her ideals and finding them in Shirou. It's about a broken and battered humanity breaking away from the colder cynicism and finding its hope again. In my opinion, that idea is what forms the core of the Fate route. This particular reading, more so than my previous one on Society, and its flaws, feels a lot more intentional and purposeful. As a last note of analysis, I think it forms a bit of a core bridge between Fate Stay Night and Fate Zero. While often the two works are viewed as only really similar in terms of Heaven's feel, I feel like this route links thematically the best with Fate Zero, even if this isn't the one that focuses so much on an individual member of the Emiya family. I'm not going to break down Fate Zero here, and this may be even the last time I mention it in this video, because I feel bad that the Fate Zero fanboy in me has decided to hone in on it, knowing the often toxic discourse between fans of the two works. But to me, when you view what is being done by Avalon across both works, it feels like Zero is a society losing its ideals due to realizing the flaws in them, while Fate Stay Night is, as a work, it's about rediscovering them. I'd love to do a thorough breakdown of Fate Zero one day through the light novel version, but I'm pretty confident that Zero was written thematically, working backwards from the themes of specifically the Fate route, more so than the other two routes, which are often much more personal stories in terms of their thematic purpose. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the first part of my Fate Stay Night review. So yes, this review is being split into multiple parts, A, to make editing it easier for me, but B, to get it out in a more timely manner, because it probably wouldn't have gotten out until pretty late in the year for the full video. This also allows me to put a lot more effort into the individual parts. You probably noticed this part video was just a little bit better edited than some of my previous review and analyses. It's because I was pretty dissatisfied with how those two went, barring if that, there might have been a fuck up in there where my phone entered camera while I was trying to be sneaky with the script. Forgive me for that if that happened, and I couldn't hide it very well. But besides that, what's next? Well, ideally, next month you'll be getting the Unlimited Blade Works part. The Unlimited Blade Works part will include just the Unlimited Blade Works route, actually. So this review part contained the introduction and spoiler-free review section, Rin's prologue, and the Fate Stay Night portion. And then obviously the final review will contain Heaven's Feel, last episode, and the full analysis of the work as a whole. So that leaves the Unlimited Blade Works route feeling a little bit anemic compared to the other two. So I will be including a extra bit into that with a small review of the Studio Dean adaptation of Unlimited Blade Works. I'll tell you right now, it's not going to be that integral of an extra part. View it as a little bit of a bonus. It will be in the final video when everything gets merged, so you don't have to feel like you have to catch it then and there. But if you watch this part, I also, while you're here now, I want to encourage you to watch both the other parts if you want to watch them early as well, but I do want to encourage you to watch the full video when it goes up too, because in the final full video where all the parts are combined into one, I plan to include an additional section into this part as well. For this part, you can expect the additional section in the final video to be a short review of the Studio Dean Fate adaptation, more of an extended thoughts on what I maybe didn't necessarily get to say in full in the actual Anime Club reviews. Now, unlike the Studio Dean adaptation of Unlimited Blade Works, I'm not going to, really dig in to rewatching it and going into my thoughts that way. It's going to be more retrospective style, thinking back to my thoughts on it and thinking about, like, really summing up some of the parts that I alluded to in the script of the Fate review, where I'm talking about just how Dean Works kind of fucks things over a lot, not just in the matter of watch order, but also in the matter of, like, people's perceptions of a lot of these characters. It's going to be more like a compilation of that, a sum up of that. So expect that to be in there, but otherwise, yeah, that's the end of this for now. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. I've been putting a lot into this. This project was about a year in the making. So please, if you like this, remember to just like the video. Leave a comment on your thoughts, regardless of if you think I can improve with the next part, or what you think of this. And be sure to subscribe. We do plenty of Fate content here on the channel if you're not subscribed already. So yeah. I will see you guys next time with Unlimited Blade Works and Studio Dean's Unlimited Blade Works adaptations review. Oh.